Hi, good day, guys. So we're going to have a look at your theme, the voice of emerging artists. We're going to be looking at two artists, only one today. We're going to be looking at George Pemba. We find him on page 29. The two artworks we're going to be analyzing is Terra and New Brighton, Port Elizabeth. Your second artist we'll be analyzing for your exam would be Gerard Sotoko. We'll find him on page 36. The two artworks we're going to be looking at there are The Song of the Pick and Prison Yard. We won't be going over him today, but we do have to study him. In your exam, you will have to know two artists for the voice of emerging artists, and you will also need to know two artworks by each. So today we're going to concentrate on George Pemba. So George Pemba is an inspiring artist who defeated the stereotype that Black people could not become professional painters during the apartheid regime in South Africa. Pemba is often referred to as the Grand Master of South African art and is internationally recognized as one of South Africa's greatest artists. His painting depicts the conditions of peoples living in townships. The artist's painting career spanned over 6 decades and provides a remarkable visual history of what he witnessed through South Africa's transformation. He wasn't really an activist artist, but through his depiction, we got a good sense of his surroundings and daily life. He even says here, my objective is to interpret the feelings of my people. So let's break down what we meant by his artwork is influenced by German expressionism, realism, and impressionism. So let's break that down. In his art, we can see the influences of German expressionism, realism, and impressionism. So realism, it depicts society. It depicts society in a non-romantic style. If it's bad, it's bad, and it doesn't mind showing you the grit of society and of everyday living. Impressionism, that's capturing fleeting moments in daily life, almost like a photograph of people carrying on with their daily life. And then expressionism, because often the emotion of the narrative is more important than depicting everything in minor detail. He also sometimes distorts figures to aid the communication of emotion. He loved movies, and many of his works show a film quality as they look like still scenes from a movie. So we're going to analyze New Brighton over here. New Brighton, Port Elizabeth, you have to know the name of the painting and spell it correctly. And you have to spell George Pemba correctly in your exam. The date, 1992, style, social realism, and your genre is genre painting. So we're going to have a look at this artwork here, and we're going to analyze what we see. So first, tell me what we see. We see people in a street. So by analyzing this painting, we can understand the narrative from apartheid government. Okay, so the narrative of the apartheid government believed that indigenous South Africans lived in a self-created squalor, where in this image, we don't see that. We see quite the opposite. The apartheid regime believed that that Black people would rather opt to live in squatter camps than decent houses. The painting by George Pemba depicts a completely different narrative. Here we see a well-kept society, a people in a community interacting civilly, that they're taking pride in their community, in the way they are dressed. So let's break that down. We see a community of people playing in the streets of Port Elizabeth. We notice the clean streets, devoid of rubbish, litter, and squalor. There are pruned plants and hedges. Here we can see the hedges. They've been cut. People are proud of their houses and their gardens, planted next to the houses. All the houses are neat and tidy. The walls are well painted. and are in good order, contrasting the narrative of apartheid stereotyping that African people don't want to live in good, or they're not deserving of living in good houses. The community here cares for the area and the environment in which they live. We can also see through the paintings that there's no infrastructure. So we don't see telephone wires, electricity, and that's because, again, of the apartheid system not bringing infrastructure into these type of communities. So we don't see any street lights or paving, paved sidewalks, water runways, even painted lines on the street or electricity poles. The entire street, so let's now look at the perspective. The entire street culminates to a vanishing point, which ends with the industry and factories in the background. So here, these orthogonals lead your eye towards the vanishing point over here. And on the horizon over there, we see factories. The imagery intends to depict the idea that apartheid and its regime was economically driven. There's smoke bellowing from the factories in the background, indicating that apartheid government needed cheap black labor, especially for the mines, and to keep the industries running and open. Here we see many South African citizens at home in the middle of the day without work, commenting on unemployment in South Africa, as people do not have work and are biding their time with social activities, such as storytelling. We see a man dancing over here. We see a ball. We see a mother walking with her child cradled on her back. We see a bunch of boys here playing cards, maybe gambling, storytelling. We see social interaction between two people. We also see a donkey-driven cart over here. This is also quite interesting. We see a donkey-driven cart in this rural area in the settlement, where in the cities you would see more cars. And there, again, it creates a mental contrast between cars in the cities and not even horse. The long ears, that's a donkey over there, a donkey-driven cart in your rural areas. Used for transport. The image depicts the vibrance of the community. This is a happy image by using complementary colors that complement each other, that are opposite each other on the color wheel, which creates a sense of movement and joy in the painting. It does give a sense of happiness, of everyday living. So we also see the expressionistic style of his painting, and we're going to have a look at some of his other work, his watercolor work, and we're also going to discuss how it connects to German expressionism. Okay, the next artwork we're going to have a look at by George Pemba is Terror. So George Pemba, date 1991, style social realism. Your genre is genre painting. So here we have a contrast between the city, the rural life of apartheid, and communities trying to just get by, enjoy life, and the contrast of the violence of the realism of apartheid. So the following painting, Terror, Oil on Board, illustrates the brutal consequences of the apartheid system on the lives of Black people. The image depicts chaotic movement with people trapped inside a confined space. We can see people running towards the viewer, arms spread out in panic and terror in an effort to escape. Here we see a man with his arms spread, a lady with his arms spread, hat falling off. This just adds to that chaos, the movement of the image. The bus or train perspective creates a directional forces leading the viewer's eyes towards the background. So again, over here in this bus or train, we see these orthogonals leading your eye to a focal point over here, the man being shot, that contrast of the red and on his white shirt, and the silhouettes of the police, the apartheid police, and people running from them. The directional forces lead your eyes to where the violence is originating, and that adds to the narrative, the storytelling of the image. In the background, we see the apartheid police only as silhouettes shooting people inside the bus or train. In the foreground, we see people either dead or unconscious. There's a hat flying off of the man's head and scattered belongings, all adding to the chaos of the movement. We notice a prominent C-curve composition in the painting over here. This creates trapping the people, creating a heightened sense of claustrophobia, and only a glimmer of freedom is seen through the windows. We see blue skies and daylight through the windows, indicating that this act of violence takes place in the day, in clear sight of the public, which adds to the terror of the unconcealed violence during apartheid. In other words, they're not trying to hide it. They're not doing this at night. They feel that this is justified, that this is allowed, that this is part of their jobs, and this is completely, they feel that this is completely called for. The image is not depicted in realistic terms, but rather capturing the emotion. In other words, you don't see complete, perfect textbook detail on their faces drawn in academic style of that realism and portraying the facial proportions correctly. It's more about the expression and the emotion and the movement is more important than the detail of the figures. This is typical from German expressionism. There's the image is disproportionate and expression is highlighted rather than detail. Let's have a look at the colors now. The analogous colors create a somber feeling. Analogous colors, your colors right next to each other on the color wheel, create a somber feeling. And these are dusty, natural colors, earth-like tones. The striking contrast of the red and on his white shirt creates a clear depiction of the narrative of the story in the painting. It depicts the brutal violence that occurred in the townships under the apartheid regime. Again, we see those expressionistic styles, brushstrokes. But now do keep in mind that George Pemba's depiction of figures in both paintings, they may be disproportionate and they may be very rough and use harsh brushstrokes, but that's not a reflection of his ability to create proportioned, well-drawn figures in the sense of, say, academic art, like I said, or academic figures. He'd rather create expressionistic image depicting stories or scene taken from true life. So to better explain that, or to have a look, I want you to have a look at these images by George Pemba. So his earlier work, where he worked with water paint, and it was actually Gerard Sitoka, sorry, who actually influenced him and was quite influence on his life as an artist, and said to him, "Hey, get rid of the watercolors. Let's hit some oil paints over here, and let's explore your talent." And he really explored those rough brush strokes and the depiction. So here we can see these images over here, where there's more academic art style of depicting images in the colors. But then when he turns to oil paints, we have this explosion of color and a very sense of a style of German expressionism. We can even see senses of Vincent van Gogh in his style of outlines and using blues on the skin tones and those reflective qualities, where he doesn't mind contrasting color into it that really maybe shouldn't be there, but creates that, like, say, for instance, the blue on his lips and the yellow depicted in the man's face. So I will be sharing the written work with you. Let me just make this smaller for you. And let's start over here. What I would suggest is writing this down and practicing writing this down for your exam. Add in work to this. This is your starting point for your essay in your exam. There's New Brighton, Port Elizabeth, oil on canvas, and start that as your starting point. The rest of the work can be found in the textbook. But in order to get, you're trying to get about 20 marks. Your goal is to have 20 marks per essay on the artwork. So I would use that as a starting point. And again, here on terror, I would start from there and use that as your starting point on your exam. Thank you very much. I hope that helped.